Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Sue Hegland and I'm a board member with the Upper Midwest branch of the International Dyslexia Association, and we are delighted to bring you this presentation by Ellen Engstrom on reading comprehension. Before I introduce Ellen, let's take care of some logistics. We have a large number of people attending tonight's webinar and we have muted everyone's microphone to make it easier to hear. However, you can type questions at any time using the control panel window that you see on your computer. If we can answer your question immediately, we will do that, and we'll collect the rest for Ellen, and she'll be able to answer some of them when she's done with her presentation. We also wanted you to know that we are recording this webinar, and it will be available to view on our website in a few days. We'll send an email with a link to everyone who registered for tonight's event. We're able to provide these webinars free of charge because of the generosity of both our speakers and our membership. If you are already a member of IDA, I want to thank you for your support. And if not, please consider joining us as a member. You'll be supporting our efforts to spread awareness of dyslexia and to provide research-based information on effective reading instruction for all students. You'll find information on membership at our website, and we'll send you a link in our follow-up email. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Ellen Engstrom is the Director of Teacher Training at Groves Academy. For those who are not familiar with Groves, it is a school in Minnesota for students in 1st through 12th grade who have learning disabilities or attention disorders. Ellen was previously the director of the lower and middle school at Groves, and she spent 10 years as an associate professor at Landmark College, which is also a school for students with learning disabilities. While at Landmark, Ellen was a lead education specialist in their Institute for Research and Training. She has a bachelor's from Wellesley College, a master's degree in education from the University of Rochester, and that's the Rochester in New York, and a master's in educational psychology from the University of Minnesota. Ellen is also a certified Wilson trainer for a number of Wilson Reading System programs. So she brings a tremendous amount of background and experience working with students who struggle with reading to her talk this evening. Welcome, Ellen, and thank you for speaking with all of us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here tonight and to talk to you about reading comprehension and hopefully help you gain a greater understanding of what the task is and how we can better instruct students so that they are able to do it. What I'd like to talk about tonight is a couple of pieces. I want to talk about, first of all, what the cognitive contributions to reading comprehension are, because we've had some recent, very interesting research in neuroscience, which really deepens, I think, our understanding of all that goes into reading comprehension. And then I want to talk about the instruction itself, you know, what a framework for comprehension instruction could be, and also the strategies to use within that framework to develop students' ability to understand what they read. So, first of all, think about it. If you're on this webinar, undoubtedly you read. And think, how do you know when you understand something you've read? You know, what actually happens? How do you know? How can you judge? People often say, well, you know, you can retell what you read, or you can ask questions about it. All of which is maybe well true, but comprehension actually takes place when you process words and sentences in text, so there's language processing, and you add new information to the information you already have. So it's a language processing text activity, but it is also brings about new learning and new connections. So we'll talk about how does that happen. So essentially, reading comprehension happens when you extract meaning through text, and you construct meaning. So in other words, you are processing text, but you are also, through some kind of representation of what you've read, you are creating meaning from it. So this is a very active process, and it involves really three components. First of all, the reader, what the reader brings to the task in terms of interest, in terms of skills. There's the text itself, which can vary depending on what it is, and then there's your purpose for reading. And so that is going to make a difference. Let's see here. So it is an active process, not passive, and I continue to tell students, remind students that, you know, that they have a part in it. Okay, so the reader, the qualities of skilled readers are numerous. First of all, to be able to read, and when I talk about a skilled reader, I mean readers who can read words and also understand text. So that you, first of all, you have to recognize words accurately and fluently. So word recognition, the ability to decode, is important. Crucial, because if you can't read the words, you're pretty much stuck there. Skilled readers also need a strong vocabulary so they can understand, get meaning out of the words. They also need to understand how words fit together to make connected text, which is syntax, sentence construction, and paragraph structure, and so on. They need to have good verbal working memory, because in order to read and understand, you have to be able to take in new information, hold it in mind while you are making connections to it. You have to be able to make inferences, because not everything is directly stated in text. You also need to use strategies, which can be visualization, organizing strategies, summarizing strategies, and wide background knowledge in order to bring some knowledge to what you're reading. So here is, this is actually a rather famous visual here. This is Scarborough's reading rope. Scarborough did a bunch of research on what actually goes into skilled reading. And believe it or not, this is actually called the simple view of reading, though it's clearly not so simple. And down here where there's word recognition, where you see word recognition, that's the beginning of reading. That's basically where reading begins, where we have to have phonological awareness of sounds, and so that we can then make connections between sounds and letters, so we can decode words as well as spell. And then we also have to have some sight recognition of words that don't necessarily follow the pattern, regular patterns in language, and also to recognize words that we've already learned how to decode, and which is becoming increasingly automatic. So you see these strands, and they're in this what we call the bottom up, or the the bottom up part of reading. Top here, the higher order, lower order processes, and higher order of the language comprehension pieces, which involve background knowledge and vocabulary knowledge and language structures and verbal reasoning, and also just literacy knowledge in general. So the young reader, beginning readers, start with this, and as they develop, they become increasingly automatic with word recognition tasks, and increasingly strategic in the way that they approach reading text. So skilled reading, which we find down here as the rope tightens is fluent execution and coordination of both word recognition and text comprehension. So it takes years of instruction and also practice to be able to become a skilled reader. And then we're going to look into exactly what all goes into that skilled reading as well. So moving along here to this is maybe another way of looking at the simple view, and which is what we've always thought, that basically language comprehension, if we're able to understand oral language and we can decode and recognize single words, that adds up to reading comprehension. So lots of emphasis, we've done lots of emphasis on how it is that that children learn to decode and recognize words so fluently that they're able to then read and understand. So, but there are people who can comprehend text even when they can't decode well, and there are people who can actually comprehend text pretty well even though they don't decode and spell particularly well. So solid decoding skills are not a guarantee of solid reading comprehension, although they're very important, but it's not enough, as we know. So what is important? Well, the I want to talk a bit about executive functions because executive functions are crucial to the way in which we approach our world. And executive functions often are thought to be associated with attention deficit disorder. Really, there are executive function issues in attention deficit disorder, but not exclusively. So executive functions, when we have good coordination of a number of systems in our brain, executive functions allow us to regulate attention so that we can focus when we need to, organize our world so that we can so that we know where things are and how to keep our belongings together and so on. Judgment, demonstrate judgment and foresight, and also shift flexibly between thoughts. So we're not stuck on just one thing or one activity. They allow us to generalize learning to new situations, to be efficient in the way that we approach tasks, and to inhibit responses or behavior that are just not appropriate or distracting or whatever. So that's what the executive functions allow us to do. Now, the developmental course of executive function is slow. In fact, the executive functions are tend to be in the frontal lobe region of the brain, which means not exclusively the frontal lobe, but in the front. And that area of the brain is the slowest to mature. It has to do with myelination of the neural connections in the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe maturation only begins around age 9 and goes on into the early 20s. For those of you who have older children, you may think it doesn't. It goes into, you know, well beyond that. But it's a late. These are late developing cognitive skills. So the executive dysfunction or discoordination often don't show up until children have higher level demands placed on them, which is more as they approach, you know, the upper elementary or middle school. So during adolescence, the prefrontal cortex goes through maturation, and children, adolescents, adults improve gradually in their ability to self-regulate. A lot of this will bear fruit in terms of comprehending increasingly complex text. So characteristics of executive function and dysfunction is with normally developing and well-developed, well-coordinated executive function. A student can begin tasks, makes you able to stop and think about what you're doing and possibly change plans if you need to. It helps you be able to create a sequence of steps to achieve a goal, to make a plan, helps you to be able to problem solve with some efficiency, and to self-monitor. And so these are all capability skills that that develop gradually as children mature. However, when there are problems with executive function, and which can happen, which is sort of a can be a developmental delay, and can be just miscoordination of connections, then what you can see are problems starting tasks, problems stopping and thinking, some difficulty shifting from one thing to another after some consideration, difficulty making plans and also sequencing plans, what comes first, second, so on. There you can see some very inefficient problem solving and a lack of self-awareness, which makes self-regulation harder to achieve. So how does this play into reading? Well, let's look at what good readers do. And good readers, based on a 2011 study, looking at what good readers do, is before they read, they will activate prior knowledge. They'll think, this is a passage about zebras, and I know, I've studied, what do I know about zebras and so on. So they can set a purpose. So here's what I need to find out about what I'm reading about. They can motivate themselves, are self-motivated, which means they have an internal growth mindset that tells them that this is an opportunity to learn and so on. They will feel positive about their progress, and they're able to make choices of appropriate strategies to use as they read. So during reading, they're focused, they're able to pay attention, they can monitor their understanding and stop and go back or think back and figure out what they didn't understand. They can anticipate or predict what might happen or make logical predictions. They use context to figure out what words mean, what a word might mean in this context, and they can recognize when they realize they're not being efficient and there might be a better way to do it. After reading, they can think about what they read. They can retell or summarize some of the most important parts in what they read. They can then go on and seek more information from other sources and answer questions that may have come up, and feel that their success is a result of their ability to perform this task. So what you see in here is a tremendous amount of planning and organization and self-monitoring, self-regulation, and so on that needs to go on, and focusing attention, all the things that our executive functions allow us to do when they're working well. Now, Poor readers, on the other hand, start reading without preparation. They're just thinking, okay, I've got to read this. Go. They may be unaware or may forget what exactly the purpose is of their reading, what they're supposed to do with it, so they don't necessarily have a good mindset for achieving, for what it is they're supposed to do. They may, if they're consistently poor at understanding what they read, they probably feel negative and not very motivated, and they don't really start reading. They don't think they need a plan or a strategy. It's just going to happen or not, sort of like magic. During reading, they can be easily distracted by any number of things, internally, externally. They oftentimes don't know what they're not understanding. They don't know what they haven't learned. They're reading it because they know they have to and they have to get over it. And if they lose understanding, they're kind of not sure what to do, and they don't use text organization very well to help them, in such as even like with textbooks, which are constructed to help readers figure out to chunk reading and help them organize. After reading, they're not particularly likely to think about it because it hasn't sunk in very well, and they kind of think if they're successful, it just happens to be a lucky day. So again, you can see some executive dysfunction going on here too. So so if you look at it, executive function actually plays a pretty good significant role in oral language comprehension, language comprehension. Yes, our brains are wired for oral language, but we also have to be able to learn vocabulary and generalize its use, and we have to be able to understand sentences of different complexity and how the text is organized. So the text comprehension is going to call on both oral language comprehension and word recognition. So while word recognition again is really important, it is not the total the only thing that's necessary. Now, working memory is a big part of our executive functions, and working memory is kind of our problem-solving skill, what allows us to problem solve, because working memory, it holds things in new information and old information, and allows us to manipulate information to come to a plan or solve a problem or something, and it focuses our attention. So language comprehension is immediate, it's in real time, and so to process sentences, paragraphs, anything that have to do with syntactic processing means we have to allocate significant resources to that. And so if the sentences are more complex syntactically, then it's going to take more time and it's going to be more difficult to understand them. So when working memory is compromised, it's going to be much more difficult to figure out long, complex sentences with unfamiliar words. So the reader brings essentially all these cognitive characteristics to the reading task, and the text then is going to present different kinds of challenges to the reader. So basically, the text, the reader is going to need to have good executive function to be able to sort through the text, to find and to be able to understand inferences in language, which is higher order thinking. They need basic language facility, and then fluency with words, because fluency allows the reader the opportunity to read quickly and accurately enough so that she has time to think about what she's reading. So, but the thing is, not all texts place the same cognitive demands on the reader. So a lot of how reading comprehension is going to go will depend on how complex the text is. So essentially, what we learn too from good recent studies is that narrative text places many fewer demands on the reader than expository or nonfiction text. So and so through studying brain function and structure, neuroscientists have been able to really see this play out in terms of how much executive function contributes to comprehending different kinds of text. Now, so this is all well and good, but what does this mean for instruction? It's beginning to look like if we want to really support good reading comprehension, we may need to introduce expository text earlier and instruct children in how to approach it. So, what does that actually mean? So, looking at it now, and this is, you know, this is exciting, and for those of us who have looked at what reading comprehension is, how to teach it, how to support it, how to intervene to make it better for students, this flushes out a lot of information that we did not necessarily know before. We always knew that word recognition and the rate of word reading was really important. We knew vocabulary was important. We're learning that morphology is becoming also a really important part of language comprehension, so we know we have to start really emphasizing that in our reading instruction. And what we kind of suspected and really but didn't know for sure was that actually executive function plays a pretty significant role too, especially as kids get older. And so what starts out when children begin to read, early readers, we're working very hard on the word recognition and developing vocabulary and so on. But we're also using simpler texts for children to read. As their executive function capabilities mature and grow, then text also gets more complicated, so then we're asking them to apply more take a more strategic approach to reading, and this is often when reading comprehension failures begin to appear, because the executive functioning is not, the coordination of all these levels of language and the planning and the organization and reasoning are not syncing up in a way that allows the reader to get the most out of reading. So, so if we go back to the reading rope here, Scarborough's reading rope, and what we have here, we have all the things that we had before in the so-called simple view of reading. We have here, weaving throughout this rope, as it becomes, as it moves and weaves towards skilled reading, executive function, which I've kind of indicated by very crudely drawing this red curvy line, weaves itself throughout this rope as we move, as children get older and have to negotiate much more complicated text. And so that brings us to what do we do? How can we support and how can we teach good comprehension strategies? What's the framework we need? What's the role? How important are they? And how do we do it? So what are the things the factors that reviewing that are crucial to reading comprehension? Well, knowledge of text structures, because students who have more difficulty with reading, students certainly with learning differences, learning challenges, may not have very much knowledge of text structure. They may not really have noticed the difference between narrative text and stories or informative text. So why does that matter? Well, research tells us that if the students understand text structure, they're much more likely to ask reasonable, relevant questions about what they're reading. If students who don't know much about expository reading, informative reading, may just start reading with no real plan in mind and not get nearly as much out of the reading as they would if they had a strategy. Vocabulary knowledge, we know, is crucial and grows the more you read. Background knowledge. Background knowledge adds significantly to, gives you connections you can make to things you already know. And fluent reading, of course, has to do with good word level reading with automaticity and speed and so on. And then task persistence is something that's also really important, because reading is hard and it takes work to get all of the information that you need out of particularly a textbook or essay or some kind of reading that's not, you know, a story. And that, of course, goes back to executive function. So, one thing that research, I mean, if you're on this webinar, this is probably something that you're used to doing and understand well, but it is amazing how many people don't really accept this. But we know for sure that the best way to instruct students in to learn how to approach reading passages of varying types is to use explicit and systematic instruction, both of them. And it can sound like it's sort of the same, but really explicit instruction really refers to clearly teaching and practicing the steps or processes necessary to comprehend the concept or apply a strategy or complete a task. It implies, too, that this will start out with modeling. It will involve a lot of guided practice and eventually lead to independence on the part of the student. This is what we call the gradual release of responsibility, or the I, we, you approach to instruction. Systematic instruction means that you are breaking down these complex tasks into smaller chunks, which are more manageable and more effective and don't seem so overwhelming. And the other thing about systematic instruction is it uses scaffolds and temporary supports to control and manage the level of difficulty throughout the learning process, because you need to start where students can have a level of success and understanding before you can move to more complex text. So one of the things too that it's important to remember with any kind of explicit instruction and systematic instruction is it takes practice. And so there are students who will pick this up pretty naturally, and then there are students who will need a lot of practice. In fact, intervention in much smaller groups with a competent instructor to be able to master these approaches, these strategies, and so on. Another thing that research has told us too is that the ability to identify central ideas in a text from less important ideas is really an important indicator of comprehension ability. So ability to see that some ideas are connected to other ideas, and those are the most important ideas to the meaning of the text. When you can make those kind of connections and recognize that there's a central idea, a main idea, then what you're learning from the text will be easier to recall. And so some readers have a natural kind of sensitivity to that, what ideas have in common, to what main ideas are, from poor readers, but you can develop those, and that's something that you can also teach. So one of the first constructs really in a comprehension instructional framework is to teach main idea skills systematically. And so what I've got here on this screen is really a kind of a scope and sequence for how to teach main idea skills. And it can start at a very young age, or it can start any age, but with just simple categorization. Categorizing words, familiar objects, and labeling them with the main idea. So young children can do this, and cognitively this is a great activity, sorting and sifting and labeling. And I do this all the time with older students as well, looking at, it's a great activity to take some words that are specific to a text and have them just work with the words and figuring out connections between them and categorizing them and so on. The next thing would be to look at paragraphs that have topic sentences. So in other words, paragraphs that have a fairly clear structure, and then finding main ideas and recognizing them and finding where in the paragraph the main idea is that's stated. This can be done with think alouds. It can be done with students can work in pairs and groups together to figure out main ideas, and move from those then to figuring out a main idea from paragraphs then that don't have a topic sentence. So those are the implied main ideas. And then moving eventually to identifying the central idea or the main idea of a multi-paragraph passage, and then ultimately identifying chapter and section main ideas, looking at lengthy reading selections, and looking at what's the themes, central themes that are running throughout the passage. So that's this is a crucial skill, and students can develop a lot more sensitivity to it through practice. Now, if all you're doing is teaching main idea skills in a language arts class with isolated paragraphs and so on, you're probably not going to get the kind of generalization that you want. So in order to make sure that those main idea skills carry over to other areas of study, content teachers need to do main idea work with genuine content materials. So we all have to be reading teachers at this point. So how do we do that? We can teach students to self-question. Say, is my main idea too specific? Is my main idea too general? How can I change what I'm thinking is my main idea to find that it's just right? What covers all sorts of conditions here? Modeling your thought process for finding the main idea. So lots of thinking out loud, making your own thinking very transparent, asking students to do the same. And I've had some very fun discussions with students who will then argue to the death, or not to the death, but will argue powerfully for why their particular sentence represents the main idea in the paragraph as opposed to another one. And sometimes just simply having to come up with that justification is a wonderful thinking process. And sometimes when you look at paragraphs, the more complicated they get, the more sometimes you can make a case for different sentences, and that's a lot of fun. Of course, there are all kinds of fun, but the other piece, the other really, part of the framework of comprehension is teaching text structure, because how complicated the text is going to affect comprehension. If the text is complicated or disorganized, it makes it harder to find main ideas and make connections. So, of course, you want to start with text that is where the important ideas are fairly transparent. The text is not too difficult to maneuver. So you want to start, if you want to build to more complex text, which the Common Core is challenging us to do, we have to start with text structure that's fairly clear. We have to really pay attention to sentence level work. And then again, how can we do that? We can have students work with combining and expanding sentences, reviewing complicated sentences, modeling how to find meaning, and this can go on in writing classes, but it can also go on, really looking at passages in reading, and taking short passages and really deconstructing them to find meaning. And that's what we call close reading, which is a great way to really encourage students to dig into the meaning of a passage. Paragraph level, we want to scaffold instruction so you can provide clues to help students locate the main idea in each paragraph. What I often do to get students started with multi-paragraph text is to give them clues, like I'll put on the side margin a B if the main idea is at the beginning, or an M if it's in the middle, an E if it's at the end, and so that I'm really making it extremely clear where to find it, and gradually pulling those clues back too. Because what I want them to do is experience success so they're not so frustrated that they just want to give up. So again, we have to look at the text level. You know, so understanding text structure, a narrative text tells a story, it has a setting, it has characters, it has a problem and a solution, sometimes called a plot. It's got a series of events. And so there's great things to understand there. And to and to recognize and so on. But then there's expository text, and that's nonfiction, and it explains information. Expository text is more hierarchical because it has main ideas and supporting details, and we need to help students figure out a way to organize this information in the text. And there are great ways to do that. So then we go to strategies. What strategies can we use to help students organize their information that they're getting out of this text? And one way to do it is to use graphic organizers. Graphic organizers have a ton of research that support them. They are good because they represent relationships between ideas and text without using a lot of text, because a lot of the main ideas and the connections between concept and text are not immediately apparent. Graphic organizers can pull that out, and using them gives students a big picture of what they've read and improves their memory for what was read. But students get overwhelmed easily by too many templates or being told that they have to make their own organizer, especially a student that has issues with executive function, sometimes students with ADHD or students with nonverbal learning disabilities or other cognitive issues that affect executive function. They need to be taught to use a basic organizer and get used to that before introducing more templates. So, you know, I urge caution here. I like to use top-down topic webs to organize information. I like them because they're fairly flexible, and rather than having, you know, kind of a hodgepodge of shapes going here and there, they represent, you can show levels of organization, titles and main ideas, supporting details and so on by using shapes and varying the shapes. So here you see, this is from a history or government class on you know, the separation of powers in the government. That's a big rectangle. Then the three branches each have an oval, and what each branch does below is in a triangle. This represents a very clear, easy organization, and for students to get used to that becomes a great tool for them. Then there's note-taking. Note-taking takes information from what they've read to another level. It includes generally more detail. It organizes information for students and causes them to restate the information, usually with less words, and that enhances comprehension. It also boosts their metacognition because they know they've got to go look for main ideas and supporting details in order, and so they're having to deal with the fact that there are main ideas and supporting details. Note-taking from lectures is really complicated. I teach it initially from reading before I ever get into having them take notes from, you know, a lecture at all. And my personal favorite is there are a lot of different formats for note-taking, and it's important to do something, but my favorite is to do 2-column notes because it's a simple layout. It shows a clear distinction. The main ideas go on the left side. The supporting details go on the right side. It's efficient because you can cover up one part of it and answer questions, and students don't have to use a whole lot of words as they as they rewrite or restate the main ideas. And here's an example of 2-column notes from and note here too, and I mean, again, I pretty heavily scaffold 2-column notes when I teach them, so that I may put in all of the main ideas and have students find the supporting details for the right column to go there. And in this case, what the teacher's done here is to, they're studying the Fertile Crescent, and what he or she has done is turn the topics, the physical regions to rivers, etc., into questions. And turning it into a question makes, again, makes the task clearer because they have to answer these specific questions. So they have to search the text for the information. And then there's summary writing, which is great because that, is a cognitive task. It's wonderful because it reduces a large quantity of information to just stating the most important main ideas. It helps students to see the big picture, process the information, and the thing is too is that it also gives you a picture, an insight into what the mental representation the students have of the information they've read. It helps them monitor their comprehension because if they can't understand the reading, if they don't understand the reading, it's going to be clear that they cannot summarize. And I also don't really ask students to summarize what they've read without first having done either 2-column notes or a graphic top-down topic web to organize the information. And even at that, you want to provide a blueprint or a template in order to help them figure out how to do it. So what happens then with summarization is it really integrates a bunch of skills. First of all, whatever the student understands from the facts. The student then also has to organize. This again gets into use of working memory, remember main ideas, and then combine them into sentences in an organized way. And then students have to use writing skills in order to be able to do this. So summarizing is a terrific activity, and it's very important for academic writing as students develop, go on to college and so on, because every kind of academic writing involves some kind of summarizing. And here's a good example of how summarizing, how a teacher has used these strategies sort of together to do kind of a short answer to an essay question where the students have set up, the student has set up a 2-column note situation for, his brother and Egyptian friend, and then with that organization then is able to go down and create a paragraph that answers this question up here. And a great example of teaching students to organize before they write. And finally, using questions, teaching students to, first of all, asking and then teaching students to generate and answer questions while they read that support higher level thinking. So if they have and I'll often create questions initially that kind of model answering questions as in the reading. That improves memory, and it gives, again, provides a purpose to the reading task when you have to go answer questions and seek answers. And the question generation, again, requires a lot of practice, direct instruction, modeling, discussion, guided practice. And I like to think about as a framework for question generation is using some of the Bloom's taxonomy levels, of questioning, like straight, flat out remembering, just finding a fact. Understanding involves some explanation, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, So these are some questions that some teachers in New Hampshire created, having to do with Islam, the study of Islam and Christianity, so on. And then, so that framework, and then then I want to help them develop some metacognitive awareness of whether they're understanding and where they're having any difficulty. So I want them to ask, do I understand what I'm reading? Does it make sense? Can I predict what's going to happen? What does this have to do with what I've already learned? I want them to be able to recognize when they're having a roadblock. Maybe they need to stop, use a think aloud, a discussion to figure out what the difficulty is. Maybe they need to retell and restate and then go back and pull out more information. These are things that, that I want them to develop this awareness so that they have a plan going into that. Vocabulary is not the subject of tonight's webinar, although we all know how crucial it is for students to be able to have word knowledge. Reading comprehension and word knowledge are very strongly related, and word knowledge develops kind of along the same time as world knowledge does, explicit instruction of vocabulary, we've learned, is much more effective when words are encountered in context. So vocabulary can and should be instructed and developed, but in the context of where the words are found and how they're used. And I'm sure there are terrific strategies for instructing vocabulary, but I will leave that for another time. So this is just sort of as a review, because we are winding down here. These 7 strategies have really strong scientific support, we've really basically addressed these in the webinar tonight. One of them is comprehension monitoring. Cooperative learning, meaning being able to work and discuss with others, with a group, with a pair, with the teacher, use of graphic organizers in a reasonable way, answering questions, generating questions. Text structure, what's the structure of the story, of the passage, and being able to summarize. These, and here's the other thing, these strategies are most effective when you use them together. So, using a graphic organizer along with a summary writing, or using or making a plan for reading, doing main idea work, and transferring those main ideas to a two-column notes following that. So the more that these are used and identified but used together, the better the more effective they are and the more helpful they are to students. So I will just end with this old Chinese proverb that I really like, which is, tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I understand. And so hopefully you have an idea of some very active work that instruction and strategies that you and your students can use to enhance their understanding of text. And it is 8 o'clock, but if there are questions, I certainly would be willing to answer questions at this point for a few minutes anyway.
Great, Ellen, thank you so much. Very, very interesting. It is getting close to 8, but one question that maybe you could comment on is you've had a lot of, these are wonderful suggestions for teachers and for schools. Are there ways that parents can support this with their children at home as well?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think, of course, I think as a parent, I think to do some paired reading and to do some and to direct students to main ideas and so on in a way that and maybe to support doing graphic organizers or asking for retells. I think the thing that that students, it depends on the it depends on the parent and the child and the relationship and so on, but I think the discussion of what I like to encourage everybody to do is to first, before peppering students with questions, think about, go for, well, okay, what are the main things we're getting out of this, and what, and the other thing to do as a parent, and I mean I've done this with my own kids a lot, is model your own thinking about what you think about it, and because that's important for kids to know that that you have thoughts about it, and that the reading leads to independent thinking, and which hopefully will encourage them to talk about it and so on. And remember that not every single question has to be written, answer has to be written down, that you can have a discussion without necessarily having to write a complete sentence. And don't be afraid of, we talk about expository text. Well, that's just nonfiction text. And a lot of kids are very interested in certain subjects and want to really dig deep into them, and so I think that essays, discussions, opinion pieces, things like that, I would encourage you to just go for things that are interesting, and really think about it, think about themes, think about higher, opinions, arguments, and things like that. That's what I would suggest, definitely.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. One other question. We had a question about how important the length of the text is to the ability of a student to comprehend it. How much does that affect them as they're working on comprehension?
I think it really depends on the reader, and the reader, what the reader can handle. So I mean, it really depends, and I think you have to gauge it by how successful the reader can be understanding texts of different lengths. So it depends on how much time you have. I mean, I like to have it's great, again, it's a building thing where you want to start with paragraphs and then move into move into more than one paragraph, connected paragraphs, and so on. And it really just depends on the age and reading level of the child too. But the big thing is you don't want to give them stuff that's going to overwhelm them. In general, as much as parents and kids want to read harder and harder stuff, it can overwhelm them and frustrate them. So I think it's important to pick text that, you know, that if kids are doing oral reading and you're talking about it, if you're with them, they should, even then, they really should be able to read at least 80% of the text without, you know, fairly easily. Or if it's truly independent reading, it really ought to be like 90%. So, because otherwise, if you have to stop and focus on, you know, decoding words and things like that, and the sentence level is too complicated, it just, comprehension gets lost because you're spending your valuable cognitive working resources figuring out the sentence structure and the words, you know. So it just but don't, biggest thing is don't make it too hard.
One last question and then we'll wrap up for tonight. We had a question about how students can be supported to become self-aware while they're reading so that they can track their own comprehension as they're reading.
Again, it's a matter of practice. There are different ways to do it. When I'm working with students as a teacher, I will often chunk up the reading, maybe every paragraph or maybe just in sections, and then have them stop and then maybe have them ask themselves or have a question that they have to ask themselves, and if, you know, about what they've read, and if they don't know it, then they obviously then they need to go back. So, you know, periodic, some structured questions. I mean, I had a group of there's, if you have digital text on a, you know, that you're able to insert stuff in and things, I have often embedded questions and in text that students have to then, that they pop out and students have to answer them and things like that, and that actually can help them orient them and keep them focused and so on, because geez, I didn't even know that was there until the question came up, I've had students say. So, you know, give them things that will help, you know, that will help them refocus them and so on, that are that they do, and it will over time become, you know, but you have to do it consistently, and you can't, you know, and reasonably, and
okay.
they'll yeah.
Great.
So that's my suggestion.
Excellent.
It's a journey, but one worth taking.
So very, very much so. Thank you, Ellen, so much for your time and for your presentation, and thank you to all of the attendees here tonight. And again, we'll have this up on our website in a few days, and wish you all a good night. Thank you.